Welcome to Sustainability Forward. My name is Rishi. I'm your host. And as always, with me is my co host, Carmine. How are you, Carmine?
Hello, Richie. Very good, thank you.
Okay, Carmine, today's episode is just between the two of us, but we have an interesting topic. It's the story of how the same sun can create two different stories in two different countries. In this case, the two countries are India and Pakistan. And we are going to explore how the renewable boom has progressed in these two countries in the past few years.
Sounds
So,
exciting.
yeah, it is especially exciting for me because I was born in India, spent most of my childhood and growing up years in India. And I remember very clearly growing up in India, power cuts became almost like a personality trait. It became part of daily life because even in the summer in 40 degrees heat, all of a sudden the electricity would disappear, the fan will stop working, and the whole neighborhood would go dark, and everyone would say in different languages, primarily in Hindi, saying, "Oh, current chali gayi," which basically means electricity is gone. And that was my experience of growing up in India 20, 30 years ago.
And I can imagine at the moment the frustration all on the entire street coming up.
Yeah, totally. And invariably there was this one family somewhere down the lane who bought a diesel generator, and whenever the power went, that family and their home would light up like an evening on Diwali day. Many kids hated him, that family, and quite a few loved him also for the exact same reason.
So let's imagine to fast forward a couple of decades and swap that diesel generator for a much more silent rooftop solar and a battery.
Yeah, and now in some Indian cities, when the grid trips, you see these scattered little islands of light. And this time, it's not diesel powering these little islands, it's actually solar.
And that image, one street, same heat, same sky, but very different levels of resilience. Is kind of the story we're talking today, Rich.
Yes, we are. So, on one side, India, which has become a renewables heavyweight. On the other side, we have Pakistan, where even though the official numbers look modest, behind the scene, there is a rooftop solar revolution that has started.
Nice. So today at Sustainability Forward, we are talking about the unprecedented growth of renewables in India and Pakistan. What it feels like on the ground, what a few key numbers tell us, and what it may mean for the next decade of the energy transition. So let's zoom for a second. The global picture is pretty simple. Most of the new power capacity the world added last year was renewable, and solar and the wind did most of that work.
Yes. And I think, I mean, we looked at this in a couple of different episodes where we talked about how the International Energy Agency's energy outlook is basically saying over this decade, most of the growth in electricity demand will actually be met by renewables and not fossil fuels. And that's a huge shift from even 10 to 15 years ago. You'll remember, Carmine, when around the time when we started working, this did not look like a possibility. And yet we have a situation where most of the new demand is being met by solar and wind.
And India is one of the big engines behind that shift.
It is. It is. Um, if you actually start looking at the numbers provided by the Indian government, it is clearly in the top tier for solar and wind capacity. But here is kind of the symbolic bit that I really like. India had a target that half of its installed power capacity should be coming from non-fossil fuel sources by 2030. But already it's basically crossed that line on a capacity basis.
That's a big narrative shift from what we get to use that tells about renewables are coming to renewables are half the system.
Yes. And they're still aiming for around 500 gigawatts of non-fossil capacity by 2030. So solar, wind, hydro, nuclear, basically all in.
There is also an industrial story behind that. India has been pushing domestic solar manufacturing, so it's not totally dependent on import for panels and cells.
Yeah, and that matters because for years, the joke was that India is on a solar mission, whereas China has the solar factories. But that seems to be balancing out a little bit, and the changes started to happen.
So let's understand how it really happened. So from the inside, as someone who grew up there and now works in this space, if I ask you, why did renewable explode in India and the way they did? What would be your short list?
So I would say three things. First, a clear national target. Those big 2020 and 2030 numbers gave the ministries and the utilities something concrete to chase. Second is related to competitive auctions. Reverse auctions for solar and wind drove prices down dramatically and created a lot of investor confidence. And finally, state level champions. States like Gujarat, Rajasthan, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and Andhra have really leaned in, providing land, grid access, and favorable local policies.
So clear national targets, competitive actions, state level champions. But give us a little bit of texture. What does it look like on the ground?
Yeah. So we talked about Rajasthan, where you've got the Bhadla Solar Park. It's basically a sea of solar panels disappearing into the horizon. Huge solar park. I saw some pictures the other day, and people were claiming, even the satellites cannot capture, the whole park in one shot. It's such a huge solar park with such a big footprint. And then in the south, in Tamil Nadu, long stretches of highways are lined with wind turbines. In Gujarat, on the west coast, these clusters where solar, wind, and industry all sit together are now turning the state into a big clean power hub.
So I use a lot of big stuff. So scale. So it's very much like an utility scale first story. Big parks, long transmissions, lines, national tenders.
Yeah, exactly. So even though we started our episode by talking about how solar has come into homes, but the big story of India is actually told in gigawatts and kilometers of high voltage lines.
And I guess it's not all a smooth sailing.
And not at all. Right? India still gets most of its actual electricity generation from coal, even though the capacity mix looks very green. Coal still carries evening peak and the bad weather days.
So you have got a lot of solar and wind installed, but not at all it runs at a time. And the grid has to juggle it.
Right. You get afternoons with plenty of solar in some regions, and then sharp peaks in the evening where everyone comes home, switches everything on, and suddenly you are back leaning hard on coal. And on top of that, long-term plans for India still include new coal capacity to keep up with demand growth.
And I guess this will probably change with batteries coming to the grid and balancing this. But so India, in the meantime, is in the width in between place. Renewable are mainstream, but coal is still the safety blanket.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's this good tension that is in the heart of India's energy politics right now.
Good. So let's cross the border. Let's go to Pakistan. When I talk to some people outside the region about Pakistan, the word that always comes up is load shedding.
Yeah. Now, well, I mean, crossing the border physically is much more difficult. It's much easier in a podcast. One of the most challenging international borders I think we have in the world today. But leaving that aside, um, if you are in Karachi or Lahore, which are a couple of the big cities in Pakistan, or even in a smaller town, you live around power cuts and high electricity bills, right? It shapes everything when you cook, when you work, and even when kids can study. Everything centers around when low, inexpensive electricity is available.
But underneath that everyday experience, what does a Pakistan power system actually look like?
Yeah. So, very roughly, and I'm by no means an expert in this, a big share of power generation is still from fossil fuels, including expensive imported fuels. Let's also bear in mind that Pakistan doesn't have a lot of energy producing natural resources within its domestic borders. The second is hydropower. The country is in fact, rich in hydropower because quite a few rivers flow through it. So it's very important, but very, very seasonal. And officially, wind, solar, and biomass are just a small slice of total grid generation today. So if you look at the official mix, and clearly Pakistan doesn't have or doesn't look like a renewable story at all.
Yeah, I can imagine there is also the money side here, the financial aspect.
Yes, indeed. So the sector is weighed down by what is called circular debt, a chain of unpaid bills where distribution companies do not collect enough, so they can't pay the generators, who then cannot pay the fuel suppliers. So it's like a vicious circle of debt moving from one entity to the other.
Yeah, plus the old-fashioned losses, theft, poor infrastructure, things literally leaking out of the system.
Exactly. Some analysis of Pakistan's official data suggests that around one-fifth of the electricity generated never shows up as paid for energy, right? That's a huge hole before you even talk about climate or energy transition.
And we talked in the past about the energy efficiency problem. But
Yeah.
now, I never been in Pakistan, but from a distance, you see an underperforming grid, high tariff, big debt. It looks like the opposite of a clean energy success story.
That's the surface, right? But underneath that surface, there's a completely different solar story happening.
Interesting. So let's go there because this part I found it fascinating. On paper, renewables are tiny, but on rooftops, what's happening with that?
On rooftops, Pakistan is a very different country. In the last few years, it's quietly become one of the biggest importers of solar panels in the world. And we have to underscore this, right? One of the biggest importers of solar panels in the world, right? Pakistan, I mean, is a populous country, but not that big of an economy, and it has still done that, right? So in the recent years, the country imported tens of gigawatts of solar modules, amounts that are roughly on the scale of its entire grid capacity.
Wow. And these are not all going to giant solar parks, as we discussed for India before, with ribbon
Yeah,
cuttings.
yeah, right. So not going into the official generation of electricity. A lot of those panels are actually going on top of homes, small businesses, mosques, schools, factories. People are putting panels wherever they can find a bit of roof or open land.
Interesting. So this is the end user driving all this. So you end up with this unofficial distributed power system on top of the official one.
Yeah, and you may remember, I mean, many years ago, we heard the three terms: decarbonize, decarbonized, distributed, and digitalized, right? So that
Yeah.
middle one is certainly true for Pakistan at this stage. So regulators might see a few gigawatts of registered net metered solar, but if you add in the off-grid systems, the backup systems, the I just slap panels on my roof systems, the real installed solar is many times higher.
Interesting. And people are paying that with batteries now.
Yeah, yeah. As panel prices dropped, lithium ion batteries started to follow. Pakistan's importing significant volumes of battery storage, enough that you now have homes and businesses running fans, fridges, machinery during outages using rooftop solar and batteries rather than diesel generators.
Yeah, and I hear him a lot of stories there. For example, a textile mill that went solar to stop losing production every time the power cut was knuckle clap that runs on solar, so people can keep it playing in the 40 degrees heat.
Yeah, exactly. If you walk through industrial areas or middle class neighborhoods, everyone has a the grid was killing my business, so I went solar type of story.
And you now start to see that show up statistically in a strange ways too, like daytime demand dropping in certain areas because rooftop solar is doing so much the work locally.
Yeah, which is extraordinary for a country that officially still has only a few percent renewables in its generation mix.
And we know, Rishi, the energy world, nothing is ever simple. Solar in Pakistan is clearly a lifeline, but it's also creating a new challenges, I guess, right?
Yes, indeed. So three big ones in particular. Um, First, the grid's finances. From a utilities perspective, what's happening actually looks a little bit scary. So your best paying customers, industry, commercial users, middle class households are installing solar. So they buy less from the grid. So the fixed costs of the grid, power plants, lines, debt, they, however, continue to stay the same. So the cost of the system gets pushed onto a smaller pool of people who can't afford solar.
Interesting. I guess this is why the government has been rethinking net metering, the price it pays for surplus rooftop solar exported back to the grid.
Exactly. There is a pressure to cut the buyback tariff to protect poorer non-solar customers from cross-subsidizing richer ones, right? It makes sense on paper, but if you are a solar homeowner, it feels like the rules are changing halfway through the game. And second, the water story.
That one really surprised me. I was not aware.
Yeah. In rural areas, especially in Punjab, one of the biggest provinces of Pakistan, farmers have been moving from diesel pumps to solar powered tube wells. Economically, it's brilliant, no fuel cost, no waiting for the grid. But when pumping feels free, people naturally pump more water. You see more water hungry crops, more hours of pumping, and the risk of over extracting groundwater starts to build up.
So climate-friendly energy meets old-school water politics.
Exactly. There are, as we always say, there are no free lunches, right? Solar is cleaning up part of the energy system, but without good water governance, it can accelerate a groundwater crisis. The third thing that we should mention here is fairness.
So who actually gets to go solar in Pakistan right now?
Okay, so mostly people with money, a roof, and access to finance, which is, by the way, not very common for a vast majority of the population. Better off households, big shops, farms, industry, they all have the potential to go solar. Lower income families or people in dense housing often don't have the capital or physical space. They end up with a two-tier system. One tier of people who can exit the grid partially with solar and batteries, another tier stuck with an expensive, unreliable grid and no real alternative.
Solar becomes then both a lifeline and a fault line.
Yeah, and Pakistan is not alone in that. But because the rooftop boom has been so fast, you see these tensions very clearly.
So let's stay there in Pakistan for a bit longer and be constructive. If you think about the next decade, what does getting it right look like?
I mean, again, I'd like to highlight three priorities. Number one, plan with rooftop solar, not against it. I think the country has to accept that distributed solar is now a core part of national energy system, even if it is on private rooftops. Second thing within that is build better data and forecasting around it. Know roughly how much of solar is out there, where it is, and how it behaves. And then design tariffs and market rules, time of day pricing, maybe even local energy markets that make use of that resource instead of fighting it. The second important thing to note is fix the plumbing of the power sector. That means reducing distribution losses and theft. So a big chunk of power isn't disappearing on the way to the customer, improving billing and collections so the sector can actually pay its bills. And then invest in transmission and distribution upgrades so the grid can handle high solar shares without constant tripping. It's nothing glamorous, but if you fix, or if you rather don't fix the pipes, it doesn't matter how clean the water is. And the third one, which we briefly mentioned earlier, align energy, water, and social policy. On water, definitely some limits need to be put in place so that solar driven irrigation doesn't pump aquifers dry. And on fairness, think about ways to bring lower income households into the transition. Community solar projects, concessional finance, or public rooftop programs on schools and public buildings that serve local communities.
Interesting. So we have, to summarize, plan with rooftop solar, fix the pumping, I like the term, and then align the resources, energy, water, and then social policy. So the choice is not solar or not solar, is what kind of solar future do you want?
Yes, Pakistan is going to keep adding solar because the economics are so compelling. The real question is whether that happens in a way that also strengthens the grid, protects the water, and doesn't leave the poorest behind.
So it's been a very dense episode. Let's try to summarize it. If you had to sum Pakistan renewable story in one line, what do you say?
I would say Pakistan is showing that even a struggling grid can't stop people from building their own energy transition. But unless policy catches up, that do it yourself revolution comes with serious risks for equity and water.
And let's go back to India in one line.
Well, India shows what state driven utility scale ambition can achieve, but also how hard it is to let go of coal even as you become a renewables powerhouse.
So today we saw two countries under the same sun, tackling different problems, making different mistakes, but both pushing the frontier of what the energy transition looks like in the real world.
Exactly. And they are not just case studies, they are previews for what many other countries will face as solar and batteries get cheaper.
It's been a great episode, Richie. By the way, thank you for sharing your personal experience on this. And to all our listeners, if you're listening from India, Pakistan, or anywhere that lives with power cuts or scary electricity bills, we would love to hear your stories. So send us messages and we may feature some of them in future episodes.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on Sustainability Forward. If this conversation resonated, share it with someone who's stuck in a load shedding updates WhatsApp group, or try to convince their family to go solar.
Great episode, Rishi. Thank you and see you next time.
See you next time.